My name is Marcus Allen Whitfield, and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, at my daughter's 9th birthday party, I sat at the edge of the yard while a man named Preston Cole shook every hand in the room like he owned the air we were breathing. I smiled. I nodded. Then I stepped away from the noise, called a woman named Diane Mosh, and told her I was ready to sign. The next morning, Preston Cole walked into his office at Cole Industries. I found out that the man he had spent 2 years calling a failure now controlled 41% of the company that paid his salary. His face did not move for a long time. His assistant, who had already heard the news from legal before he arrived, called it the quietest morning she had ever seen him have. He read the transfer notice twice, she said, and then a third time, quieter still, before he set it down and asked her to close his office door. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 7 years ago when my grandfather said something I didn't understand until the night I finally signed those papers. My grandfather's name was Walter Whitfield, and his workshop smelled like cut pine and engine oil, a smell that never fully left his hands even after he scrubbed them raw before dinner. The floor of that workshop creaked in exactly one spot, third board from the door, and I could always tell someone was coming before I heard their voice. He built furniture there on weekends, real furniture, the kind with joints instead of nails, and he let me sand the edges, even when I did it badly, even when the wood came out uneven and I wanted to give up halfway through. He never took the sandpaper from my hands. He just showed me, again, how to follow the grain. I remember one October afternoon, the light coming in low and orange through the one dirty window, dust hanging in it like something suspended in water. He was running his thumb along a chair leg he had just finished, checking for a rough patch only he could feel. He said, "Marcus, people will always tell you what you're worth, based on what they can see. That's the smallest kind of worth there is." I nodded because I was 11, and I thought he meant something about being humble, about not bragging. I didn't understand what he actually meant for another 2 decades. That workshop was the only place in my childhood where the quiet felt safe instead of tense. Everywhere else, quiet meant something was being decided without me. At home, things were different. My father worked for my grandfather's old business partner, a man named Harold Cole who had married into money decades earlier and never let a room forget it. Dinners at our house were quiet in the wrong way. The kind of quiet where nobody is comfortable, where a fork against a plate is the loudest sound for whole minutes at a time. My grandfather came to those dinners sometimes, and I noticed the way my father's shoulders dropped half an inch when he walked in, like a held breath finally allowed to leave. My grandfather always brought something small, a jar of honey from his own hives, a book he thought I'd like, once a wooden toy train that fit exactly in my palm, its wheels carved to actually turn. Those were the only gifts in that house that didn't come with an expectation folded inside them. I noticed things even then, the way children notice things adults think they're too young to catch. I noticed that when my grandfather talked about his old company, the one he'd built from a single delivery truck into a real regional logistics operation before selling half his interest to Harold Cole to keep it alive. During a hard year, the adults in the room got quiet in a different way. Not comfortable. Calculating. I noticed my uncle asking pointed questions about the estate at a Christmas dinner when I was 12, and my grandfather changing the subject with a joke that wasn't really funny, and everyone laughing anyway. Too quickly. I didn't have words yet for what I was watching. I just knew that whatever my grandfather had built with his hands, some people in that room had already started dividing it in their heads. I had no power to do anything about that feeling. I just carried it, the way you carry a stone in your shoe that isn't quite bad enough to stop walking and remove. My grandfather got sick the spring I turned 27. It started slow, the kind of slow that lets everyone tell themselves it isn't really happening. And then it stopped being slow at all. I drove 2 hours every Sunday to sit with him, and toward the end, he mostly slept. The machine's breathing in patterns. I learned to read without meaning to. I held his hand, and I talked to him anyway, about nothing. About the weather, about a chair I'd been trying to fix using what he taught me. My cousins, who had visited maybe twice in 5 years combined, started showing up more often in those final months, standing a little too close to the doorway, asking the nurses a little too many questions about paperwork. I remember thinking that was strange before I let myself understand why. I overheard my uncle in the hospital hallway one Sunday, on the phone, using the word assets the way you'd use the word groceries. He said, "Once the estate clears, we split it 3 ways. That was always the plan. Don't get sentimental about it now." That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I stood outside that door for a long moment, my hands still warm from holding my grandfather's, and I said nothing. I filed it away. I had learned by then that saying nothing and noticing everything was its own kind of strength, maybe the only kind I had access to at the time. My grandfather died in June, early in the morning, with just a nurse and me in the room. At the funeral, my uncle wore a suit that looked freshly bought, and he cried in a way that seemed rehearsed, timed almost. And afterward at the house, I watched him walk through the rooms, touching things, a lamp, a clock, the back of a chair. The way you inventory something instead of the way you mourn someone. I didn't say anything then either. I went home, and I mowed my grandfather's lawn that weekend because nobody else thought to, and I kept doing it every other Saturday for months after. Quietly, without telling anyone. It was the only thing that felt like mine to protect. I had become invisible to the rest of my family long before that funeral. The harmless nephew, the son who never quite measured up to my own father's expectations. I decided, somewhere in those quiet Saturday mornings, with a more running, that being invisible wasn't a weakness. It was cover, and cover is only useless if you never learn what to do with it. In those same months, I started doing something I never told anyone about. I still had a key to my grandfather's house, the old one on Miller Street, and once a week I let myself in after work and walked through it slowly, checking the pipes hadn't frozen, wiping dust from the mantel, watering the single fern by the kitchen window that had somehow survived him. Nobody had asked me to do any of it. Nobody had noticed I was doing it either, which was exactly how I wanted it. I kept his tools oiled in the workshop the way he'd taught me, wiping each blade down before I put it back in its spot on the pegboard, because a tool left dirty rusts by spring. Eusid Tusai, and a rusted tool tells you everything about the hands that owned it last. I wasn't protecting a house. I was protecting the only proof I had that someone in my life had once built something worth protecting at all. The letter came 4 months after the funeral, tucked inside a woodworking manual on the shelf in his workshop. The one place nobody else had bothered to search because nobody else had bothered to go there at all. My name was on the envelope in his handwriting, the same hand that used to write "Big Jaw, Kid" at the bottom of my school drawings. Inside was a single page and a business card for a woman named Diane Marsh, attorney, with an office 2 towns over. The letter said, "Marcus, you were the only one who ever came for me, and not for what I had. Call Diane." She explained the rest. "Don't rush it. Wait until you understand exactly what you're holding before you tell anyone you're holding it." I didn't call her that week. I sat with the letter for 11 days, reading it in the evenings until I had it memorized, until the paper started to soften at the folds. When I finally sat across from Diane Marsh, she opened a folder and told me the truth in plain, careful language, the kind of language that respects the person hearing it. My grandfather had never fully sold his stake in coal industries. The logistics company Harold Cole's family had since renamed and expanded. He had restructured his remaining shares into an irrevocable trust almost 15 years before he died, naming me as sole beneficiary, with a vesting condition tied to my 34th birthday, or to the death of the last surviving original partner, whichever came first. Neither the Cole family nor my own relatives had known the trust still existed, because my grandfather had structured it that way on purpose, quietly, over years, using a different attorney than the one the rest of the family used. He told me once, Diane said, folding her hands on the desk, that he wanted whoever ended up with it to have earned people's trust before they ever knew they had power. He said you'd understand that when the time came. 41%. Enough, combined with 2 smaller allied blocks, Diane had been quietly coordinating with 4 years on his instructions to control the board outright. I learned, sitting in that office, that my ex-wife's new husband, Preston Cole, was Harold Cole's great-nephew, and that he had spent the last 2 years positioning himself for a full buyout of the minority shareholders. My grandfather's trust included, at a price Diane called insulting, well under half of fair value. He didn't know the trust existed under my name. Nobody did. I overheard the rest of his plan almost by accident. 3 weeks later, standing outside a restaurant window where Preston was having dinner with Vanessa and 2 men I recognized from the company's board photos Diane had shown me. Was saying the vote was scheduled for the second week of the month. The numbers were locked, and that the Whitfield situation resolves itself once the old share gets folded into the buyout. Nobody left to object decida date. He said a dollar figure. He had no idea I was standing 8 feet away with a coffee cooling in my hand. I texted Diane 2 words that night. I'm ready. Preston went to sleep certain he had already won something. I lay awake in my apartment knowing exactly what. He didn't. Diane's office smelled like old paper and coffee gone slightly cold, and she kept a framed photo on her desk of my grandfather standing in front of his first delivery truck, decades younger, grinning like a man who hadn't yet learned what people would try to take from him. He sat in that chair you're sitting in probably 40 times over 15 years, she told me. Always alone. Never brought a single relative with him. Not once. I understood, hearing that, exactly how long. He'd been quietly building this without a single person in our family suspecting a thing. She laid it out for me the way you'd explain something to someone who deserved every detail and not a shortcut. The trust would vest automatically on my birthday regardless of what I did, but I had a choice about how loudly to accept it. I could let it activate quietly through the transfer agent and simply appear at the next shareholder vote as a stranger with a controlling stake. Or I could formalize it earlier through a signed acceptance that let her start coordinating proxies immediately, well ahead of Preston's buyout vote. If you wait, she said, you win eventually, but you win small and late, after he's already moved money around. If you sign now, you beat him to the vote entirely, and he never sees it coming. I understood, sitting there, that this was never really about money. It was about a chair my grandfather sanded 30 years ago, and a boy who thought being humble meant staying quiet forever, instead of staying quiet until the moment actually mattered. Preston tried one more thing before any of this became real to him. He invited me to lunch, which he had never once done in 3 years of being married to my daughter's mother. And he talked about co-parenting harmony and how it might help Lily if I found more stable footing, he offered. Almost as an afterthought, to help me get an interview at a warehouse he partly managed, said it kindly, like a favor between men. I understood exactly what it was. It was someone trying to fold me smaller before he found out how large I actually already was. I said, I'll think about it. And I watched him relax across the table, thinking he'd planted something useful. My daughter noticed something was different that week, regardless. Lily asked me at pickup why I seemed far away, and I told her I was just tired, and she held my hand the rest of the walk to the car without saying anything else, the way children do when they sense more than they have the words to name. That night, she asked me, out of nowhere, while I was tucking her in, whether Grandpa Walter had liked Preston. I told her Grandpa Walter never got the chance to meet him. She thought about that for a moment, the way 9-year-olds think about things, with their whole face, and then she said she thought he wouldn't have. I asked her why. She shrugged and said, he liked people who fix things, not people who just talk about them. I didn't tell her how close she'd come to the truth. I just kissed her forehead and turned off the light and sat in the hallway outside her door a little longer than I needed to. Night before I signed, I drove out to my grandfather's old workshop, which I had kept paying the small property taxes on without telling anyone why. I sat on the same stool I sat on when I was 11, and I ran my thumb along the same chair leg he had finished at. October afternoon, still smooth, after all these years. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I almost drove to Vanessa's house that night. I almost wanted to tell Preston exactly what was coming. just to watch his face change a day early instead of on schedule. But I remembered what my grandfather said about the smallest kind of worth being the kind people can see, and I finally understood, sitting alone in that cold workshop with sawdust still in the corners, that the worth he meant was never about hiding forever. It was about not needing anyone's permission to know what you were already carrying. I cried there for a while, not from weakness, but because I finally understood a man I had lost 2 years too early to properly thank for any of it. I wish my own father had been the kind of man who protected what mattered instead of counting it. I wish he had taught me the things my grandfather taught me instead of the things he actually taught me. But wishes don't hold up over time the way real things do. What my grandfather left me does. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to turn. The signing happened at 11:50 at night over a video call in my small apartment kitchen with the overhead light off and just the laptop screen lighting the room in blue. Diane walked me through each page slowly, her voice calm and unhurried, even at that hour, pausing after every paragraph to ask if I had questions, letting the silence sit until I actually answered. "This makes it real," she said. "Once you sign, the transfer agent processes it first thing tomorrow, before market open, before the board even convenes for their scheduled vote. I sign my name, the way my grandfather taught me to sign things, slow, deliberate, no rush in the letters, the pen barely lifting between them. The clock on my laptop read 12:03 when Diane said, "Congratulations, Marcus. You're now the largest single shareholder of coal industries." I sat there a moment in the dark kitchen, the refrigerate humming somewhere behind me, the only other sound in the apartment. I am 34 years old. I am, as of tonight, the man who holds the company Preston Cole believes he runs. Across town, in the house I used to live in, Preston was almost certainly asleep, dreaming about a vote he thought he had already won weeks ago. He would find that out in about 9 hours, over coffee, in an office he thought was still fully his to shape. The birthday party the next afternoon was for Lily. Streamers in a bounce house in the yard and far too much cake. And Preston found me by the drink table, with a smile that hadn't heard the news yet, a smile that still belonged to the man he'd been the day before. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Easy. Ones who actually matter are building something you can't see yet, on purpose, so it can't be taken from you before it's ready to stand on its own." Preston stayed on at Coal Industries in a smaller role, under a board he no longer controls, and he has not brought up the warehouse conversation again, not once. Diane still handles the trust's affairs, and she still tells me, every few months, that my grandfather would be proud of how slowly and carefully I moved through all of it. As for me, I still have the workshop, the smell of pine somehow still living in the walls of it after all these years. I go there most Saturdays now, and I've started teaching Lily how to sand a chair leg the right way. Slow, with the grain, no rushing it. I think about my grandfather every time her small hand gets it wrong and tries again anyway without being told to. And I think, some inheritances are money and some are patience. And the second kind is the one that actually protects you when it matters. If you've ever had to stay quiet and let time do the proving for you, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.